Welcome to Build That Rental, the first in a series of informational events designed to support and educate small developers, builders, and property owners on creating rental properties in our community. First, we want to extend our sincere gratitude to our sponsors, Alcare Health, Mid-Rogue Foundation, Common Connections, the Grants Pass Imp, Josephine County Chamber of Commerce, the City of Grants Pass, the Grants Pass City Housing Advisory Council, and the Greater Grants Pass Rotary Club. Their support has made this event series possible. This initiative comes in response to the housing shortage and rising rental costs in Grants Pass. By bringing together industry professionals to share their expertise, we hope to provide valuable insights and resources to help navigate the complexities of rental property development, from land use codes and financing to construction and incentives. Tonight, we begin with a critical first step, understanding the new land use code and how to take advantage of it. Over the last 3 years, we have seen significant changes in planning and land subdivision, opening new opportunities for development. Our speakers will break down these changes, explain what is now possible, and answer your questions. We look forward to an informative discussion and encourage you to participate. Thank you for being here, and let's get started.
This event series was started with the Housing Advisory Committee at the city. We realized at that committee there were a number of different changes we made over the last 7 or so years that weren't out in the public, they weren't known, and so we thought, okay, we're going to have to start publishing this, talking about what some of the changes, the significant ones, and then that morphed into a series of events where we talk about a number of different things around rentals. And since that's where the 7 events are come, they're roughly a month and a half apart throughout the year. Our sponsors, Alcare Health has been a fantastic sponsor for this and other things in the community. I can't brag about them enough and going to them and saying, hey, we want to do this odd thing, and they say, yeah, that sounds right, it sounds like it's good for the community, so they help us with that and gave us the money for the pizzas and the sodas and the paying for this room and whatnot, and then the printing. And then there's Mid-Rogue Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization in town here that works on housing issues, and they're also part of that grant process in helping to actually administer the grant. City of Grants Pass Housing Advisory Committee, Amber Meek here is staff for city, and she helped create this presentation and works on housing issues. And then the Chamber of Commerce has also been a very big supporter of this and our efforts to get this done through Kat, who works there, Terry is back here, and there's probably some other people from the Chamber here as well. And then Common Connections is a nonprofit in town that's working to help put these on as well. So a little bit, I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is, Amber and I went around a couple times about data and what kind of data to present to you. So this is a real quick, easy thing. Every 10 years, each one of those bar graphs is every 10 years of construction of either duplex, triplex, or fourplex throughout Oregon. So you can see the right-hand side is 2021, 2010, 2019. So there's not been a lot of construction of multiplexes in Oregon, and even fewer in Grants Pass. And so this is just kind of an indication of where the need is and where the opportunity is for builders. And I think the population growth would probably be the opposite of this in the other direction. So I think that's a pretty good indication of what's out there and what's available for people who are willing to build. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, so we're going to try to cover a few topics today. We're going to go just a brief overview, and we're assuming that we're going to talk to the first-time builder-developer. Some of you understand how to build, and so some of this may feel silly or redundant, but we're going to try to start at the beginning with the first-time builder-developer, talk about a few things, and then we'll move forward. And if you have questions, please go ahead and raise your hand and ask a question. We'll try to save as many questions for the end of the presentation, and then we'll try to do a little networking afterwards if you're interested in that. But if you do have a question and it pops in your head, go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll try to get to it. But we'll try to stay on topic and on time. But we're going to cover county versus city, the differences between the two of those, and what you need to know about that. Changes to city planning code, which will include parking, solar setbacks, open space, ADUs, middle housing code, middle housing land subdivision. Those 2 terms at the bottom, middle housing land subdivision, they're kind of wonky terms, middle housing, but what the state means by that is what's sort of affordable to the middle population of people in the community, not the high-end custom home owners or builders, but who's going to rent or maybe own a duplex and live in one side for themselves. That's kind of what they mean by middle housing. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, so first thing to talk about a little bit is for those that don't know, there's the city of Grants Pass boundaries, and then right along the edges, this map is really not very good, it's probably a little better in the brochures, but the blue line represents the urban growth boundary and the city boundaries. We're going to talk about mostly city zoning today, because that's where there's the availability to build rentals in dense formats. You can do some ADUs in county, but that's really about it out in the county. So we're only going to talk about the city. So the urban growth boundary is the area that's not in the city yet, but it's been designated as land that will become part of the city. So it can be developed at a higher density equivalent to what's allowed in the city. So if you're ever out there looking for land, you can look for things that are not necessarily in the city, but in the urban growth boundary. There are some complications to developing that land in the urban growth boundary. You have to bring it into the city. It has to be allowed to be brought into the city. There's some complications with that. And then there's the common complication is there's not a lot of utilities out in those areas. So that's one thing to think about when you're looking at land. Go ahead, Amber. So then the other thing that we're going to talk about is in the city, there are things called zones. Okay, there's residential zones, there's commercial zones. You've probably all heard those terms before. But it's one thing to think about when you're looking at properties, what are the zones? There's a lot that's allowed through some of the new changes in residential zones, but there's also neighborhood commercial, general commercial, central business district, and business park, and those all allow for housing of some sorts. And so we're going to sort of just remind you that when you're looking at things, to go ahead and consider that, the different zones. This map is also something I'm going to use as an example for the city's mapping system. So the city has, for you that are interested in looking at a piece of property or just exploring, the city has a mapping system that's really fantastic. It's a little wonky. Sometimes I struggle to find what I'm looking for, but it's the city GIS system. So if you go Grants Pass, City of Grants Pass, and then go map system or City of Grants Pass system, go to the maps. It's really an excellent tool. Once you work your way through it, kind of figure out how it works. Can you go back one slide to that map? So I took a screenshot of the map so I can show you what it is here. Upper right corner, there's those circles of black circles with symbols in them. The one on the far left of that sequence, that's layers, map layers. And so that's where this pop-up comes in. And then when you're in the mapping system and you're looking at this, these arrows next to the middle one that says zoning group, you click on those little arrows and that opens up what's there. And then you then click on the eyeball and that turns that on or turns it off. So if you go in there and you want to see, is there a sewer line nearby? Is there a water meter nearby? What's the zoning? How you can get landscape. You can get a number of different map layers on there. It's very helpful when you're just kind of glancing around saying, is this a viable piece of property? Before you go spend 10 hours chasing something down, you can just glance through it. But again, I find it a little wonky. I know people that use it a lot of times. Justin here is a land use planner in town, and he uses it a lot, so he can breeze through it when I'm sitting with him talking things, and Amber as well. So get in there and use it a few times, figure out how to make it work. It's an excellent tool when you're just exploring. Go ahead to the next slide. But if you write down something for yourself called the development code, so if you're ever in the City of Grants Pass Development Code, and Google that up, and that brings up the code that has to do with planning and most of what happens when you want to decide, when you need to look at whether you can or cannot do that thing you're interested in doing, where you want to build 3 townhouses on this lot or something. And the development code, Article 22, is the one that covers most of that detail. It's a little long, it's a little hard to get through, but it's there if you need it. And then there are various other articles, 1 through 30, which cover most of the rules within the city. And that's a really excellent way of looking at things. So one of the things we asked you to do is register back there on the back. Amber here is the housing specialist, and she creates a newsletter 2, maybe 3 times a year. Once a year, okay. Once a year, come on. Pretty ambitious there, no pressure. But that newsletter she sends out to builders and people that have gone through the building department, and if you sign up, she'll also send it to you. It's probably very good for realtors, people in the development world, and it covers the changes that have happened over the course of the year, whether it's been at the city or at the state level. There's something very recent that just came out of the state she was just talking about over there that sounded very exciting. It really opens up a lot of developments as well, and I don't know the details of it, so I'll just butcher it if I talk about it. But if you're interested, sign up for that newsletter. That's the only thing you're going to get from her, I would imagine, is just that newsletter once a year when it comes out. Worthwhile to have. Okay, so some of the significant changes that happened in the city planning code, but not building code. So one of my notes here is to talk about that. So for some of you that are new to this, there's planning code and then there's building code of the city. And planning code sort of dictates, can I put that kind of a building there on that property? What's the sidewalk need to look like? That sort of configuration of the building, what's the use of the building? That's planning code. That's sort of your first step. Can I put 3 townhouses right there? How would that work? And then there's building code. Building code sort of says, okay, you need to have a beam that's this size, the electrical plug goes there. That's a little further on in the process when you're going to build something, planning code. But there are points in which the planning code dictates, or the building code, dictates planning code. So you have to be aware that there will be times when they overlap each other. But the first step is planning code and understanding that. And then when you get to the design, then it's the building code that comes into play. Okay, so first significant change that the city's done, or first significant change we're going to talk about, the city has adopted recently is going to be parking requirements. So there are no longer any parking requirements in town, throughout the entire town, correct? Yeah, throughout the entire town. Now, there's a lot of however, buts and exceptions to that. So you have to be careful. If you're building up a development in your mind and what you think you want to do and you start sketching out, there's no parking requirements, but there are some exceptions to that. So be careful with what you start to plan and what you start to think through. And one of the biggest exceptions is if you do create parking spaces, they have to comply with those parking standards. You don't have to have a parking space, but if you make some, you got to comply. So you got to be careful with that. And then if you get into 4plexes or larger, then you have ADA standards involved. So you have to also pay attention to that as well. So yeah, so 4plex, that's a 4plex, 2 up, 2 down. And then one of the things to consider is the handicap parking that's needed now with 4plex, and one of the units being ADA compatible. Let's go to the next slide. One of the things I would recommend if you start to work towards your design and developing and thinking through this process is do your best to make whatever units you do build as universally handicapped accessible as possible. They don't have to be handicapped, they don't have to meet pure handicap ADA accessibility standards, but if you can make the doorways 3 feet, if you can make things a little wider, they'll block it into the wall so you can put grab bars on there. I've had rentals for 30 years, and some of them are rather old buildings, and I've spent a lot of effort to try to put grab bars up for tenants who I like, who I want to keep. And they're on walkers now, or they were in a wheelchair for a year, and that hassle is big. So if you can build yourself units, they don't have to be ADA compatible, because that's a really stringent standard, but you can get close, and it's really worth doing that. It'll save you a lot of efforts in the future, a lot of hassles. So do consider that when you're building. 12, next slide.
Actually, I'm going to jump in for a quick
second. Please go ahead.
So on that note, we have one of the largest generations that are retiring right now. So this has never been more important because people who are retiring, a lot more people are having mobility disabilities, and we don't have the units for that. It's very difficult for people to get into units when they're in walkers. They can't do steps, they have wheelchairs, they need assistance getting in and out of bathtubs. You can save yourself a ton of money as a landlord if you're thinking about this now before you build, because if you put the studs behind the shower wall now, all you can do is put those handlebars in. If it's not there, you got to tear the whole thing down to get those handlebars up. So there's some very small things, very cheap changes you can make now as you build that will save you a ton of money down the line and will make your unit available to someone who needs it that couldn't go into it otherwise. So just wanted to plug that in there.
Yeah, and to add to that, the 50, 60, 70-year-old tenants are really good tenants.
They're great.
They are great tenants. So if you are going to do something, it is nice to make it as ADA compatible as possible, because it does help with that. Go ahead. Okay, one of the other significant changes the city has adopted in the recent past was solar setback standard changes. And so what that has to do with is can I put this 2-story building right next to my property and shade my neighbor? The restrictions have been lessened, so those distances have been shrunk, and the formula by which you determine whether you can or can't has been changed and simplified. So it's a lot easier to understand now. You can go in there on your own and ask for a couple pages of that article that dictates that, and you can kind of figure that out on your own. You don't need a high math degree to figure it out anymore. But do be aware when you're sort of bouncing ideas around in your own mind that there are standards for shading a neighbor if you go up 2 stories or 3 stories. Okay, one of the other significant changes that have happened over the last couple of years has been the open space requirements have been drastically shrunk. In the past, the open space standards were quite onerous for apartment complexes or multi-unit spaces. I want to say maybe 2/3 of the space, 2/3 of a lot would have to be left open for open space. That's just kind of a number off. Does that seem about right? Number
30%.
Yeah.
30% of gross lot was what it used to be.
30%, but then if you add in all the other open requirements, it becomes 2/3.
It was one of the worst in the state.
Yeah, worst in the state.
So.
And it's been fixed in the last couple of years. So it's much easier to build. You don't have to put as much land into open space. And open space in developments is both what it used to be required is quality open space, meaning playground space for kids. But then there's landscaping open space, and then there's setback open space, and then there's the parking requirements, and all of those other things. So those have all been shrunk drastically. So it's much easier to build now. And most of that does not apply to anything under 11 units. So if you're doing anything under 11 multiplex or 11 multifamily units on one lot, it doesn't apply to you, which is a great change. Okay, go ahead, next one. So ADU changes. So some of the most significant changes, or most valuable to the community, to the general public, has been the changes to ADUs. First, the adoption of code about 8 years ago, 9 years ago, something like that. Adoption of ADU standard codes, and then the simplification and the opening up of what the definition of ADUs are and where they can be built. So an ADU is basically it's an acronym for accessory dwelling unit, and it's basically a granny apartment, a second apartment on a house, or a third apartment on a house. That's the one that you can now have 2 ADUs on a piece of property. That one right there is an apartment built up above a garage. And it is a tiny bit under 1,000 feet in town. So ADUs have to be under 1,000 feet, and you can have 2 of them on a piece of property with an existing house. And the configurations can be anything you want. They used to have restrictions on the configurations. In the past, one had to be attached and one had to be detached, and now you can have it any way you like. There are also incentives. The city offers incentives for the construction of ADUs. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, so one of the great things that we have at the city is plans already in existence for ADUs that are essentially pre-approved. They cost you nothing, so if you wanted to take a look at those are available online right now. We have studios, 1 bedrooms, and we have 2 bedrooms. So there's quite a few options. On top of that, ADUs are not required to pay as many of the system development charges, which can save like $4,000 on your tree planting. That's pretty helpful. One thing I also wanted to talk about with accessory dwelling units that was a recent change is when we did the open space changes, we also snuck in that you can now have a single wide manufactured home. Previously those were no longer allowed, but now you can use those as an ADU. So that is also an option, and for a very long time it wasn't. So if you're thinking of quick ways to throw an ADU in, that is an option now.
And I believe most all mobile homes now are built to common construction standards, so they meet nearly every standard that's met by a modern house that's stick framed or built on site. So they're generally done well these days.
They do need to be on a foundation though.
Yes. Okay. Next slide. Middle housing. Okay, so this is when some of the more significant changes that have happened over the last couple of years. So middle housing now allows for duplex, triplex, fourplex, cottage development, and townhouses can now be built on any residential lot in town. So they're no longer excluded in any zones other than business park, those kinds of things, where they can't be built in industrial areas. So they're now allowed pretty much everywhere, which is really opens up the land availability, what can be built out there. They have nearly, in building code, it's really hard to say always and all of them and say afterwards, because there's always some exception somewhere. If this, then there's an exception over here. So I want to be real careful to say that and leave you with the impression that, yeah, you can do this. Now, there are sometimes exceptions. But the setbacks, the utility road improvements, the permitting processes are now the same as well as residential houses. So that makes it a lot easier as well. In the past, building a triplex or duplex or townhouse was quite a complicated process, going through the permitting process. Now it's not. Now it's supposed to parallel the same as single-family detached houses. So that makes it a lot easier as well. Go ahead. Okay, so this is just an example of some of those types of houses, or types of housing. Duplex on the upper left, a triplex upper right, or a townhouse. Below it would be townhouse. And then detached quadplex, bottom left. Okay, so one of the things to consider when thinking through the potential of developing something is their townhouses are individual lots. Right? So you take a lot, each one of those, bottom right, there's a lot line between each one. And each one of the significant things with that is the sewer lines and the water lines and other utilities go individually to the lot. I'm going to draw a little picture, I think. Maybe it'll help. So if you have a lot, then you're going to build your townhouses like this. This is the street. The sewer lines and the water lines come out like this. And that's so you can theoretically partition this off and sell that to somebody. And that allows you to do that. Now, if this is a fourplex, then you don't necessarily have to have all of these sewer line and water lines. So that's the advantage of a fourplex or a triplex. It's less expensive than some of those utilities, but you're sort of stuck with owning that if you wanted to partition and sell it. That's the one complication with the middle housing thing, the differences between the two of those. Go ahead, Amber, to the next slide. Cottage cluster developments is another common type of development. It was at one point, 6 years back, probably the most advanced, the best way of developing density on a piece of property. But it's since been leapfrogged by the middle housing code. That changes have come down. So it used to be pretty exciting that you could build a bunch of small houses on one lot. You could sell them off individually if you wanted to, or keep them. But now with middle housing, land use, subdivision, middle housing, construction, they're not as exciting as they used to be.
Still exciting though.
Still exciting. You can actually live in them or have them, but they what used to be allowed in these now is allowed on duplexes and triplexes and townhouses. So they're not quite as interesting. One of the things that the Cottage Cluster Development Code allows or requires is that open space in the middle. It requires common open space, and then the parking is off to the side somewhere. But it allows for quite a bit of density on a piece of property. Go ahead, Amber. You want to take this one? Or the next two pages?
Yeah, so this kind of goes into some of the manufactured home things that I was talking about before. We amended the code to allow for smaller manufactured homes. Previously, they had to be, they were too large to do single wides. Now we brought the size down so that you can do the single wides again. The state made a lot of amendments that cities individually can't require more of a manufactured home than they would for a single family home. So that has kind of lowered a lot of barriers that have stopped for a long time people from just putting a manufactured home on a lot and having that be the development that they do. You still do need to watch out though, because once you go above 6 manufactured homes on a lot, then you start entering into manufactured home park regulations. So that's something to keep an eye on, but you can go up to 6 before that triggers. So they can be a pretty fast and somewhat affordable way to put quite a few units down. So it's something to think about. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, I'm not terribly familiar with loan processes, but I think manufactured homes now are sort of fall in the same loan category as single-family detached stick-built houses. So they're a little easier to build and then sell if you wanted to sell some or keep the loans on them. And again, the construction standards for manufactured homes are supposed to be equal to stick-built on-site housing.
To my knowledge, the financing of manufactured homes kind of ebbs and flows. It goes with times. Essentially, banks will have packages of mortgages that they can sell in a certain amount that they can do. So some years it's super easy, and some years the banks just aren't super interested. So definitely talk to the financiers before you start chopping a bunch of them down. Make sure that it's a good year for it. But yeah, they have come leaps and bounds in being able to finance them.
And for some of those people that might be interested in that sort of a scenario where you may own the land or buy the land and want to quickly put some buildings on it, there are I'm not sure quite what the right term is, but factory-built homes now that are a little higher quality than the mobile homes. We had the pleasure of touring a place up north, just outside of Salem, called Blazer Industries. Really large warehouse system, and they're building buildings in there. And some of the buildings are tremendously large, but they're also building custom homes and smaller homes. And I think what they can offer is really fast turnaround time. I'm not sure the prices are really any better than a custom stick-built house, but their time is quick, and their design features they can do everything there for you really quickly. So I think maybe the design savings is there as well. But there's some pretty interesting stuff with what they're doing. And so, do explore those kinds of things if you're interested in something like that. Go ahead. Okay, so middle housing land subdivision is another topic that's come through, and it's lowered a lot of barriers to getting things built in Grants County or the state. We kind of started to delve into a little bit here. What middle housing land division basically gets to is that a person can take a parent parcel, say it's a 1 acre lot in town, and they can chop it up into little pieces. And those little child parcels, I think, is that the term the city uses? Parent-child parcels? That is the term the city uses. Parent-child parcels. Those child parcels don't have to meet the same standards as that parent parcel did or does. So if this is the parent parcel, you still need the standard setback here, standard setback here, standard here, standard here. But these other, let's pretend this street is over here. But you can subdivide this parent parcel up into small lots and put a whole lot of little houses in there if you want to, or townhouses or apartments, whatever you're doing. And they don't have to street frontage, which is one of the things that used to be required when you chopped up a parcel. Is the new parcel you had to have a street frontage. Now it doesn't. Now you can put a private driveway in here. One of the complications back to the utilities is, however, in this scenario, I believe if these are going to be unique parcels, there, didn't draw that quite right. You still have to find that sewer line coming out of here and that water line, and those all need to be individual lines. So that can be quite the spider web of utilities in that ground. So be conscious of that kind of a scenario if you're looking at this type of potential development for yourself.
The state is working on problem solving that particular issue. There's a lot of different ways it can be handled. One of the options currently floating around is just to put them in and let people have to figure out what happens next if something breaks. You can do an HOA. There's a lot of different ways, easements, that it can be handled. But that is one of the things the state's kind of problem solving, so we don't get these wonky lots that have pieces just for sewer lines.
Yeah, right. And I think one of the other things, in a conversation with Justin the other day. He talked about a process with DEQ. DEQ kind of dictates the sewer line issue here that comes out of the state and the Department of Environmental Quality. And there is a process by which you can get some waivers or some releases on these and put in a single sewer line, and all of these feed into that single line. Not sure what that process is with DEQ, but it's not good. That's what
Not yet.
Not yet.
We're working on it.
They're working on it, yeah. So there are those coming, and I think the state is really really putting a genuine effort to resolve these things. I think there are some departments of the state that are probably not putting as much effort as they should. ODOT, maybe, DQ, Holy.
We don't need to say anything mean.
We don't need to say anything mean, yeah. But if you, I'm going to plug this, if you ever have the opportunity to talk to anybody at the state level, those various departments do need to be prodded in the backside to be part of the solution to this. Department of Environmental Quality, BOLI, which dictates how people get licensed, OSHA, all of those things, BOLI has tremendous effect on the cost of labor. The ODOT and various things that ODOT has to do with roads and creation of roads, the Consumer Business Services, whatever that department's called, they're the ones that adopt new code, every 2 years, new code. So if you ever have the opportunity, if you feel like writing a letter, please do. The state needs to know they need to do, those departments need to do more. And the same, let's see, this talks a little bit about what I just talked about. Is there anything I should add, Justin, to any of that?
Yeah, we can get kind of like that.
Okay.
Basically, the exciting thing with middle housing land division is we in Grants Pass have been pretty parcelized. We don't have a lot of those big 10-acre lots that developers are looking for to put apartment complexes on. So we've been stuck for a while on not getting these high density things. But what we really need anyways is infill. It's these smaller, easier to integrate into the community. It's done here, built by people here, owned by people here. We're not shipping all of our money off somewhere else. And now, if I had this long lot, instead of saying, well, I used to just put a house on it and sell it, I could put 4 units on it. I could maybe sell those 4 units. I could keep them. I could do whatever. There's so many more possibilities with it, and that can be any lot that was zoned to put a house on it. So it's really opened the doors for everybody to be able to do something.
One of the more exciting parts about that too, if you can visualize that drawing up there, and unit 1, let's pretend unit 1 is an existing house. You can do the same thing with what already has an existing house on it, and then parcelize the back end of that piece of property. And there's a lot of opportunities in town for that. That's what Amber is touching on there. There's a lot of what would be sort of underdeveloped lots in our town that could use a duplex put in the back of them, either ADUs or more units like that. There's quite a lot of, I think, potential for that kind of development in the southwest and southeast, both with those lots that are slightly underdeveloped and access through the alleyways to the back of lots where you can put an ADU in the back. I have two places that were originally houses, and then somebody converted the garages in the back to ADUs, and they're excellent rentals. And I didn't do it. I bought them that way years ago, but they're excellent in that sense. Done events where we've talked to people about various topics. We don't always capture who's there, and sometimes we have opportunities afterwards to connect to people. Somebody wants to sell something, somebody wants to build something, or something like that, and we don't have that capacity to do that. So if you do sign up, please, that'll help us to connect. Okay. Justin, if you've got something to add to land use, I'll give you the microphone. There are a few people here also. Remind me your name again? Kat is with MLS, and she's brought a little bit of paperwork. She went on her own initiative and printed up a bunch of flyers, I guess, for lack of a better word, with what land that she pulled up that's available for sale right now, raw land in town. So if you're interested in looking at that, she's got that there. And if you're interested in just getting her card, feel free to. And then Jenna here is going to be presenting a bit on loans. Is it next month? I can't remember what sequence we're in. Next month. Yeah. Next month. Justin? So this is Justin Gerlitz. He's one of the smartest guys in town that I know. He's amazing. And he's both a civil engineer and a land use planner. So when the land use planning questions, he's just spot on with that. Go ahead, Justin.
Well, I appreciate both of you presenting that. So this has been, we'll call it a frustrating but very exciting time. Housing, as many of you know, has gotten very expensive. It's outpacing wages, and it's very hard for people to rent and buy. And so we have been struggling for many years in Grants Pass. As you know, we have not built apartments in Grants Pass for a very long time. And we are very fortunate to be involved in some projects right now that are affordable housing projects, that are apartments. But those come with tax credits and grants. It's a whole other category for most investors. You know, most local people cannot dive into that world. It comes with very specific upfront costs. You've got to apply for these grants. You've got to know what you're doing. These are developers that usually drive these projects in a lot of sense. So what we're finding with Mill Housing the last couple of years is this brand new process that the state basically said, you're going to do this, Grants Pass, Medford, Bend, Eugene, and they just said, that's it, we got to do something. And so what we're finding is Mill Housing is really filling that gap that apartments really would normally fill in a community. And like Doug and Amber mentioned, in Grants Pass, as you know, we don't have a lot of big tracts of land. We're not this big level, Phoenix, Arizona type of environment. We have all these hills and these rivers and these creeks. And so what we're doing instead is we're really taking these lots that have a house on them and they have a huge backyard. I always refer, like the northeast side of town has a lot of these lots where there's these ranch style houses with these extremely deep backyards. And what's allowing us to do is to really have homeowners and small investors start thinking about, what can I do with the property that I do have? Or if I'm buying an investment that has a single house on it, what else can I do with this property? Man, one of the things that I want to mention on these plexes, traditionally you say the word duplex or triplex or quadplex, and you just imagine everything pushed together in one building. That's not the case anymore with this change. So, like Doug mentioned, take a garage out back. Maybe it's a 2-story. Maybe it has an attic, a big enough attic above it where you could actually put a unit above it, a unit below it, have your house up front, and you can call that triplex now. So that falls in the triplex category. You can take your house and maybe you've got a bedroom on the back that's got a bathroom attached to it, say just a master, and you could cut that off. You could wall that off, put a door on the outside of it, call it a duplex. So it's really just kind of flipping what we're all used to and starting to think about how to build these things differently with what we have, what you have on your property. Kind of to expand on what Doug and Amber said, things that you have to think about. There's the physical space, there's the, can I add this to the property meeting the setbacks, but then you start to think about things like utilities. So, if you add these plexes, yes, you can say on a duplex share a water meter. Most people don't like to because you have to figure out how to split that bill. One person might use more water than the other one if it's bigger. There's three bedrooms on one and one bedroom on another. So you do have to think about things like, well, do I have to add an additional water meter? If they're all in the same lot, typically you could share a sewer service for a 4-plex. That's already there. If you start to split them, like Doug mentioned for Middle Housing Land Division, you have to start, as of right now, you have to start separating those out. I am pushing really hard, and I know they're pushing real hard right now with DEQ specifically to change that. There's no reason that every single unit should have its own sewer lateral if they can all be combined and have plenty of capacity. So that's in the works right now. Tiny homes are kind of something that a lot of people think about right now. What we're finding with those, like the mention on manufactured homes, a tiny home is either built on a trailer or it's a manufactured home. Talking to the building official, most of the tiny homes that people are kind of cranking out of their little small factories right now can't be permitted. So you have to really, before you buy something, somebody might sell you and they say, hey, I've got this tiny home, it's on a trailer chassis. I could tow it in, I could set it in your yard. Well, if you live somewhere where no one ever is going to see it, no one's going to complain, that's one thing. But if you live in the city and you expect to get a permit on that, the building officials tell me most of those can't be permitted. So when it comes to where do you want to invest your money, you have to really think about those things.
Jump in on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So those tiny homes on trailers, those are RVs in our books, apparently, eventually. So that's the way the city's going to look at them. And in Josephine County right now, there's not really a permit process
And again, these are just things that, yes, sir.
I'm sorry. Where's the line between an RV and a mobile home?
It's gonna be whether HUD certifies it.
Okay.
And RVs typically, like the term RV is typically, it's licensed to drive on the road, like a trailer would be. So there's definitely a gray area in the middle right now. People are trying to figure that out, and it probably will change over time, but right now, today, there's some of these things, some of these changes, I mean, this is the last couple of years. Government does not work that fast. So there's a whole lot of catching up that's going on right now in the code section of things in financing.
Yeah. And so that sort of definition, certified for Oregon, a mobile home or something like that, whatever you're looking at, it needs to be certified to meet Oregon standards. Because it may be certified to meet Idaho standards, Georgia standards, but if it's not certified for Oregon standards, it's not going to be permissible here.
So where would I find the classification of the difference? Is it based on size, square footage?
The seller, if it's a reputable seller, should have that information. They should say, we're certified for these states. Seller of a manufactured home.
So I guess
New.
I'm asking more from a builder's perspective. The qualifications of the difference between a mobile home, where would I just find that? If I wanted to start building,
If you wanted to build mobile homes,
that would be my question. Where is the classification difference?
I have no idea.
There's manufactured mobile homes typically have a state certification process. So essentially, you're saying you design it, you get it permitted, and you have to get it approved through the state in Oregon per state on a state basis, and then it's permitted to ship.
Yeah, and then you
Manufactured.
Yes.
Right.
Mobiles are 376.
Yes.
manufactured, sure, sorry, yeah. So the terminology there, yeah. So I think that's a significant process to create your own factory. It's just kind of, I think, where your conversation's leading
Just,
toward.
just solely based off curiosity, I'm sorry, I'm
Yes,
just
sir.
trying to.
A two-part question, what is the minimum size square foot home you can put on any lot in Grants Pass?
You could go really small now. I mean, essentially, now
There's no minimum size, right?
you do have to pay attention to where the lot is located. The lot was created as part of a subdivision. Whenever that was, a lot of times there's
Along
code.
with the ADUs and the setbacks, everything has to fit the setback to fit the lot.
You have to fit the setback, and some subdivisions
There's
have.
no minimum size square foot house. To answer his question, even in a deliverable manufactured home, there is no minimum size. It all just depends on the loan that's being applied to it, as long as it's on a foundation over 600 to 700 square foot, correct?
In a general sense, yes, but then there's some subdivisions that have codes, covenants, and restrictions, which are the rules.
CCNRs probably won't even invite a manufactured home in anyway.
Some of them won't, and a lot of them have minimum house sizes associated with them.
There's no minimum size square foot manufactured home per se in Grants Pass that is required other than the loan to apply it.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well-
I believe that might help you.
Yeah, and the other complication to that is you can build it super small. Planning says you can do that,
As long as the kitchen and the.
but building code will only let you get so small to have all the appropriate distances between various things within the structure.
One of the important things that's going to be another presentation is on loans and lending, and that that's where we get into. Okay, now you have an idea, you think you want to do this, and you have to start thinking about, will it appraise for what I'm putting into it, so I can take out a loan on it? And if it's on my existing house property, how does that affect my current mortgage? Because a mortgage lender is going to look at your, say you have a single family home, you want to build an ADU in the back, or you want to cut off a piece in the back. They're going to say, well, how does that affect the loan that I have on your property, and can I overcome that? And so that's something we're going to get into a lot more detail on in a different presentation.
Sorry. On the middle housing subdivision, if the child lot, i.e. what you refer to as child lot, it has a separate APN number and a tax lot and becomes a sellable entity?
That's correct. Typically, there's a homeowners association to date, and we're getting creative, but to date, there's typically a homeowners association because there's common area on the parent lot. But yes, it will have a separate tax lot, and in essence, you should be able to get a loan on it as a single-family home.
One additional question. You're referring mostly to the city regulations. Is there any parity with the county, or is that a whole separate end?
The county's not caught up yet. A lot of this was pushed down through the state. And we were triggered because of our population size and having to implement it. I say having to, I'm personally happy about it. But it was a big change, and you know, Oregon really protects their green spaces quite a lot, so they're very defensive of those county spaces. But there are some changes being pushed for, at the very least, a little bit more opening of ADUs and some of those middle housing types. We're just not there yet.
Yeah,
Was that for the county? Is that what you're saying?
Correct, for the county.
the county does have some allowances now for ADUs and what they call detached living units. And there's a difference between them. One of them is more mother-in-law's quarters. You know, I have a family member I want to have their own little unit. And there's a lot of rules where they have to be within 100, 150 feet of the house. So you start thinking of a 5-acre lot and you want to build a rental on it. Well, most people don't want to build it within 150 feet of their house. But if you have a garage or a shop that's located next to your house, space above it, there are some allowances for that in the county. But when it comes to middle housing and splitting it off as its own lot and those kind of things, that doesn't exist currently.
So if you have a lot and you're on a septic and it's an acre and you only have one and you want to put another one, can you do that?
You, in the county, assuming you're saying the county, you can, again, add that single unit within a certain distance of the house. You do have to look at things just like in the city. You have to look at what's the septic capacity. So if you have a 3-bedroom home and the septic was sized only for 3 bedrooms and you're adding an additional bedroom and kitchen, you might actually have to look at expanding your septic system.
I want to just make sure I'm clear. So what you guys, what everybody's talking about right now is only in the city boundaries, right? Like you count, like for instance, we have commercial property in the county, 2 2-acre lots. And it's around septic, but they're commercial properties. But I mean, like, if you could put like you were saying, up to 6 manufactured homes on there, but you can't do that in the county.
No.
But is the county going to be working that way?
Probably not.
Okay.
Not to that extreme at all.
All right, thank you.
Can you put ADUs on county property? Does it sound made a visual as in comment?
No, you in general.
I just want to make sure, you're saying that the CC&Rs in a subdivision will supersede the state mandate at this point?
As of right now, and I'm assuming sometime that's going to get challenged, but as of today, there hasn't been anything that's come down that I've seen that says that they supersede CC&Rs. But I'm imagining that someone will challenge that sometime in the near future.
Next question, if you have a lot that's already zoned for multiple families, let's say it qualifies for a triplex, it's got a single family home on it, and yet you're saying a single family residential lot, you can put up to 3 units on it. Can you put additional units on, say, a triplex lot that's already got a home on it? Can you put a triplex on it or fourplex?
So one of the great things that middle housing code did was mess with the density requirements. So your triplex counts as 1 unit for density. So yes, essentially, as long as the lot size can fit, you're no longer constrained as much by that density maximum. And so that's where you would get the best benefit, is that you now can add a lot more units without triggering that density maximum.
But that's all contingent on how big the lot is.
You still need to be able to fit things into it, yeah.
And something to mention, so everything that was mentioned tonight on their presentation in general pertain to residential lots. So any residential zoning in the city of Grants Pass, or we'll say Medford too, since all our area. Commercial does have allowances for residential uses, but in Grants Pass, it has to be at least a triplex or more. And you can't do middle housing land division in a commercial zone. So the middle housing land division, the splitting of the little lots within the parent lot, that's a thing that's specific to residential lots at this point.
Not multi-family.
You can do multifamily in commercial zones, but it would be a single ownership.
Multi-family zone, R3, R4.
So the R's, all of the residential zones, the highest density to the lowest density, these rules apply across the board, which is totally different than what we've had in the past.
Going back to the tiny house discussion, and you mentioned those are technically considered RVs. In residential zoning, you have like RV
within Josephine County and the city, there are no allowances for living in an RV on a lot unless it's in an RV park. It is something that's been looked at, but ultimately that's one of the things that the county has more control over than the city, to my knowledge. But I have kind of pushed for that a little bit. It is one of the things comes up in the housing, how can we do better circle, because we know people are living in RVs on city lots. We know it's happening a lot. So it's something that I would like to see in the future. We might as well make a above board way to accomplish that.
Okay, so we're going to get going here. We'll just go over a little more questions and answers if anybody has questions. One of the things I wanted to touch on a little bit was somebody back there talked about how small a small house can get. So city planning code sort of allows for as small as you want it, lot size and house size, but there's only so much space between the swing of the door. You have to have a certain amount of space between the swing of a door and when it hits and everything. So by the time you get all done, I believe one of the lead planners about 7 years ago, Tom Schauer, did the exercise of just how small could he make a house, and I think it was just a tiny bit under 300 feet when everything was included in there, with all the proper distances between the toilet, sinks, all of that stuff. So that's about as small as you can get. You could probably finagle that a little bit and whatnot. The other thing that I want to touch on is the staff at the city are really an excellent resource. If you have questions, they're there to be helpful. They really, I don't want to say they own the problem of our housing issues, but they want to resolve those problems as much as any of us do. So if you got a question, they're there to be helpful. They're there to answer questions, tell you what's possible, what's not. And I think one of the things I've learned is if your first try comes up with an obstacle, don't be afraid to say, but how can we get around that obstacle? How can I do this anyway? Or how can I want to get something built here. How can I get this built here? What are my options? And explore those. Because there's a lot of, I don't know if there's too many people in this, there's not too many people here from the city that'll kick me if I say this, but there's a lot of flexibility in there that they can find ways around if they work at it or if you find another way of doing it. So don't be afraid to poke and prod explore your scenario that you want to build a triplex here or a bunch of townhouses and whatnot. So are there any other questions? What are your questions, I should say? Somebody else, yes sir.
Yeah, I'm not really sure I understand the solar setbacks. I think I understand where the shade point is, either on the ridge line or the eave or below the ridge height on that. I understand that, but what does that mean?
Yeah, so solar setback is the distance of a building from a property line so that the shade it creates doesn't shadow the building on the other side of the property line, the next door neighbors, right? And so that handout is not supposed to be a comprehensive formula or methodology to figure out what the setback standards are. So don't rely on that to give you the answer. It's just to say there is something like that you have to pay attention to, and recent changes have made it easier to build next to a property line and made it easier to understand what those solar setbacks are. But that's not supposed to be comprehensive. So if you want to explore that, the best thing to do is go to the city and ask them for a couple pages of what it means and then just kind of explore it.
Is that in that
Article 22?
GP Development Code, the articles?
It's in 22, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, I believe it's in Article 22. Should be solar setback standards, what it should say, that you can explore it. Yes, sir.
If I'm looking up, just to clarify, the new solar setbacks, is that strictly for the ADU type stuff, or is that across the board?
Everything. Any building along that property line.
Adding to your own home?
Yeah, yes, thank you. And that is on the north side. So it's the north side of your property which creates a shadow on the south side of the adjacent property. Yep. And then there are other standards. It gets complicated because the other standards, depending on what the zoning is of this lot and the zoning of that lot, because if the zones are different, that changes the setback standards as well. So it can get a little wonky.
While you're thinking of all your questions, I just want to state that if you do want to come in and talk to the city about what you can build, it's always very helpful if you have an idea of what you want to build. Because if you come in and you say, here's my lot, what can I do with it? The planners are going to give you a blank stare. So come with an idea, as much of an idea as you can. And if you really have no idea, talk to me first.
Yeah, and she'll say build lots, build dense, which is kind of the mantra is to get as much built as possible in town.
I may be biased towards density.
Yeah. Somebody else.
I have a question that I don't know if the really has an answer. I was just curious about this, the total 2-4 unit housing permits by decade in Oregon. Is that in any way related to interest rates? Or is it just the cost of the building?
There's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah, so the question was, he's looking at, I think, maybe slide 2 or 3, the bar graph that describes the number of plexes built in Oregon over the last five decades, not centuries, let's say centuries, decades. And then he asked, is that related to interest rates? And I don't know, I've not done a dive into where those numbers come from. It's just a general representation of the lack of building to describe the opportunity that sits out there for people who want to build something.
I could talk for about an hour on that, but ultimately, a lot of it came down to development code changes and patterns in developing. And then, yes, financing and how things get financed, and just what was popular, what was being sold, what was being pushed. And again, a lot of development code and just planning, what does good planning look like back then that has shifted.
Yeah, there was a lot of emphasis 20, 30 years ago on the single-family detached housing. And so there was a lot of code, a lot of emphasis, a lot of lending. Builders got used to doing that. And it's also, you know, if you're a speculative builder, you can build a house and sell it, and there's lots of people out there wanting to buy it. You build a triplex speculatively to go and sell it, there's maybe not so many buyers out there. Those that I know that are in the rental business have either built or bought for themselves and not done it as speculatively. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean there aren't builders that build triplexes and then sell them. But most of the people that build these things keep them for themselves.
Going back to the development charges, they take one lot, parent lot, and maybe a bunch of child lots. Can you expand on how the development charges work on that? I thought it was a discount. You know, I heard that word.
So the question was, how do the system development charges work for Middle Housing Land Division? And I think you've heard this a lot tonight. It gets complicated. Specific to accessory dwelling units, the city does have some provisions to not have to charge a handful of those system development charges. So it can save you some money on an accessory dwelling unit. Currently, that does not extend to other middle housing types, but it is something that's been talked about. But as it stands right now, the other types would just be charged their system development charges. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
In regards to the SPCs for attached ADUs, like the previous example of converting existing master bedroom into its own partition, there's no addition of fixtures. Are there also SPCs still charged, or can you make that ADU conversion without having to pay any new SPCs? Sometimes if you're on the same water, sewer line,
I was going to say, I should know that answer, but I'm looking over there.
Yeah, I'm not certain either.
So that scenario, if you took an existing house, you didn't expand it, the only thing that you might be looking at is if you added another water meter, you would have to pay system development charges on a water meter, which are, I think, close to $3,000 right now for a new meter, depending on the size for a small one. But if you, in theory, didn't do anything but cut that room off, put a door on the outside, and you shared the water meter, I don't believe there would be any additional system development charges associated with that.
Thank you. This gentleman back here reminded me, you mentioned you had pre-approved plans, like studios, 2 bedrooms, things like that. How would that work if would there be less charges if there would be some change to these pre-approved plans or something like that? Say like a different foundation, or like if it needs to be narrowed a little bit because of the lot size or something like that?
So they're pre-approved as they are. If you have to make changes, it will probably open up having to go through an approval process. So yeah, you'll have to go through a little bit more, but ultimately it still can save you quite a bit on the design side of it. So, yes.
Yeah, and if you can avoid some of the engineering fees, the structural engineering fees in changes, so if your changes are just, I'm gonna put the door on the other side, or I'm gonna, narrow it slightly, you might be able to avoid some of those fees as well. New permits, you have structural engineering fees to get structural engineering and those things. So that can help in that scenario as well.
So those plans publicly available somewhere that you can just look at?
They are on the city website. You can go into the departments under housing, and then there should be pre-approved ADU plans.
This might be too broad of a question, but it was really helpful to hear an example of SDC costs for the for example, do you have any like examples of costs for the purchase process to build one of these pre-approved ADUs or examples from experience?
We do not for tonight, but we are going to cover that. I believe it's in the next meetings. One of the topics of the next meeting is going to be sort of permitting processes, and we'll probably, it's never exactly the same because there's lots of ifs, this, then that, if this, then that. But we'll do our best to create a table of costs and permitting fees and whatnot for the next presentation as well. So you just got a general idea, okay, I'm looking at 7%, 10%, 12% of the cost of the project.
Is there going to be local banks or credit unions that are going to be involved, loans or grants or anything?
They're going to be here to talk at the next presentation.
So one of the presentations?
The next presentation, is that what you said?
Is it going to be one of the presentations?
Yeah, the next one.
Okay.
I believe it's April 14th. I got it, thank you, April 14th. Will be lenders. We have direct mortgage, Jenna? Gina. Sorry, that's okay, Gina. And then I believe we're going to have somebody from Evergreen as well. And then we're going to also, on that, the next event will also do half hour, 40 minutes on city permitting processes. Touch on that as well. Yes. Bob.
We have a lot of vacated alleyways in parts of the southwest part of town. If you were to develop that with possible collective triplex, is there a fire code change or a firewall required in the alleyway like that?
The fire barrier between units is building code, and that's only gets more strict.
How far back in these alleys material they want you to build?
The setback off the alley is that?
You get a bonus for the alley.
Get a bonus for half the alley?
I think, yeah, I think it's depends, it always depends. There are utilities back there that are powerful.
Right.
Masonry wall required?
No. Well, depending on how close
I don't know the exact answer to that because I'm not the building guy, but you do get a bonus just like you do on the street from a fire code perspective where you get to count that distance because nobody effectively can ever build there. So it's not like building up against your neighbor's property. But you do have to, on alleys especially, you have to be considerate of utilities. Often there's a sewer in the middle of the alley, and again, that's the middle of the alley, but then you also often have power poles that run down one side of the alley, and those might have additional utility setbacks or power lines or something too. I guess I'll mention on that topic, anywhere on your property, there's a specific distance you have to be away from a power line, and it depends on the type of power line as well. So, sorry, not a clear answer, but
Did you say it's not really changed?
I don't see a big change.
No, I don't think that's changed significantly either, not that I'm aware of. He was asked about alleyway, putting ADUs, how far close to the back of the alley, or how close you can get to the alley with an ADU. Okay, well, we can adjourn. Thank you. And again, Kat has some paperwork, and I thought I saw you passing it out, so.
I handed them all out. I promise I will bring more next time. You can scan the QR code. I'll create a portal so you can get used to what the values of properties are, any questions you have or anything like that. When I come next time, I'll bring topics about how to find a realtor, how to choose a realtor. So if you do decide you want to purchase a parcel, you'll understand how to interview and how to find people who are resourceful and helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and Justin here is a fantastic resource. He is worth buying an hour of his time to talk about what it is you're thinking about doing and what the different possibilities are. He is very worth it.
We're going to stick around for a little bit. You're welcome to stick around as well. I would encourage you to talk to each other. There's a lot of smart people in this room with a lot of cool ideas. Thank you for coming.
Yes.
Thank you.